Congressman Jake Auchincloss is our guest. Let's go on the record. He's a Bay State Democrat with an independent streak. With a potential government shutdown looming, what will Congress look like after the August break? The congressman is here to talk us through.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to OTR. I'm Ben Simoneau, along with News Center 5's political reporter Sharman Sacchetti. Ed Harding is off on this Sunday morning, and with us here at the table is Massachusetts Congressman Jake Auchincloss. He is a Democrat from Newton, representing the state's 4th congressional district, elected to a second term last November. He's a Marine, commanding infantry in Afghanistan in 2012. He also holds degrees from Harvard and MIT. Welcome. Good to see you, Congressman.
Nice to be back.
Thanks for being here. Let's start with former President Donald Trump, who is again dominating the news cycle. This week he faces arraignment in Georgia, and voters seem to view these charges of election interference a little more seriously. What's your reaction to this?
They should. This was an individual who swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and instead he conspired against it. He needs to be held accountable for that. And what I would encourage all American citizens to focus on is the substance, not the spectacle. Donald Trump always tries to make it about himself. He always tries to suck up all the oxygen in the room for self-aggrandizing purposes and to fuel his fire. We saw it work in 2016. We saw it almost work in 2020. And it could work again in 2024. We need to make the star of this story the rule of law and the core American principle that no one is above it.
So,
isn't it the substance, though, that people who support him take issue with? It seems as though they just simply don't believe these charges are legitimate.
That is why the January 6th committee from last Congress did such important work, is it laid out the facts and the testimony through primary sources in compelling detail. And now we're going to see in 2 different courts of law at the federal and the state level significantly more detailed evidence about the crimes that he committed, both to defraud the American public of their right to a free and fair election, and also to directly try to strong-arm election officials into miscounting and misallocating electors.
all right, so a lot of the work the January 6th committee did was presented on television. Cameras are allowed in state courts. They're not allowed in federal courts presently, but some of your colleagues, including Congressman Stephen Lynch and Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey, have now called for the federal trial, well, at least one of them, or maybe both of them, of the former president to be televised. Don't you think the American people have a right to see inside that federal courtroom when the former president is on the stand and is on trial?
Decisions about cameras in the courtroom is going to be for the judge to make in consultation with the Judicial Conference, not for politicians to make. To me, the important thing is that the substance remains in the spotlight and that Donald Trump is not allowed to become the star of his own show again. It needs to be about the rule of law. We need to be prioritizing the core fact that he broke the law and he's being held accountable for it. That's what needs to punch through to the American people.
Do you think he's being held accountable enough with some of these accusations and the innuendo that he's putting out there? I mean, I've seen coverage, some analysts say, if this was a regular citizen, even say a congressman like yourself, who was kind of making these accusations against, the prosecutors who are prosecuting him and the others who have worked in law enforcement, that they would be behind bars already. Is he being held truly accountable for that?
I think Donald Trump has a 50-year career of evading accountability, and the buck needs to stop now. And I would encourage the judge and the prosecutor to treat him just as they would treat any other American citizen.
All right, the investigation into the president's son, Hunter Biden, it may be headed to trial. A plea agreement fell apart over tax and gun charges. Now the man overseeing the investigation has been elevated to special counsel. How much will the Hunter Biden scandal play into the 2024 race, do you think?
The Republicans want to keep it front and center because to them it's defense through whataboutism. Every time you point towards Donald Trump and his crimes against the Constitution, they want to say, well, what about Hunter Biden? And the truth is, this is not apples to apples. It's not even apples to oranges. It's apples to insurrection. Hunter Biden, if he broke the law, should be held accountable. I just wish that Republicans would say the same thing about Donald Trump.
But it is sort of a time where we're living in where this is unprecedented. The 2 top candidates, now headed into 2024, one of them facing multiple indictments, the other, his son, may be headed to trial. It is sort of an unprecedented time.
Yes, it is. And the distinction here is that when Donald Trump was president, and even after he was president, he tried to weaponize the Department of Justice in really a mafia-like fashion, whereas President Biden's Department of Justice has had free rein to pursue charges against Hunter Biden, and yes, to hold him to account if he made mistakes.
All right, when you get back to Washington next month, the potential government shutdown will be all the talk. Do you think this is something that Republicans, who of course control the House, are committed to shutting down the government one way or the other? Is there any way around it?
There is a way around it, and the way around it is for House Republicans to honor the deal that they struck this spring. Speaker McCarthy and President Biden shook hands on a deal that would fund the government for the next year. And in the grand tradition of Washington compromise, frankly, both parties didn't much like it. But a big block of members of Congress from both parties came together to pass it because it was what was right for the country. Within days, House Republicans have reneged on the deal. Senate Republicans haven't, Senate Democrats haven't, the White House hasn't, House Democrats haven't. It's just House Republicans who are insisting that they're going to balance the budget on the backs of Head Start teachers, as opposed to actually talking about the 4 out of every 5 federal dollars that go towards entitlements and military spending. So they're being disingenuous. They are walking back from a good faith agreement that they committed to. And unless they change course, we are headed towards a government shutdown.
Can a Speaker Kevin McCarthy survive, though, without a government shutdown?
I think he could, but that's for his own internal politics. Part of being elevated to Speaker means that you've got an obligation to put country above party. He's got an opportunity here to build on the bipartisan progress of last term. Last term, if you look at a year ago in August, we passed investments in manufacturing, investments in science. We empowered the middle class through lower healthcare costs. Now, August 2023, 1 year later, the Republicans are saying unless you defund the police by zeroing out Department of Justice allocation, we're going to shut down the government. I think American voters are going to respond to that split screen.
All right, let's talk about Ukraine. It's making gains in its counteroffensive. It took back territory from the Russians last week, and some Republicans on Capitol Hill want to pull financial aid and military support. Do you think that could happen?
No, I think there is still a strong bipartisan consensus in favor of support for Ukraine. I've been a champion of supporting Ukraine from day one, not just through military aid, but also through economic intelligence support and through rallying our allies to be a force multiplier for our own support. And the key is going to be for those center-right Republicans to stand up to their own base, because Donald Trump is inflaming the base right now. He's, as we know, a longtime fanboy of Vladimir Putin, and he is doing his utmost to try to undercut the Ukrainian cause as they fight on the front lines of the free world. I am committed to sustaining a bipartisan consensus in Congress that their win is our win, and that we cannot truly compete with China in the 21st century unless we stand up to Xi Jinping's ally and fellow autocrat in the Kremlin.
Well, let's talk about China for a second. You're a member of the House Select Committee on China. Their economy is struggling. Unemployment among young people surging so high they're not even publishing that figure anymore. Yes. We know the real estate market in China is frankly teetering on the brink. Does that make negotiating with China more promising, or is this a risk for the entire world's economy?
China is a massive economy, and so obviously a downturn there does have reverberations. And China has significant challenges demographically with their aging population, economically with high youth unemployment and a property market suffering from huge debt. And yet I would caution American policymakers from over-calibrating to what's happening in China. The most important questions for the Sino-American relationship are about America, not about China. And so that's why I get so frustrated on the committee when my Republican colleagues say, hey, we got to outcompete China in the 21st century, and then they go ahead and they cut funding for science and education. We are not going to outcompete the Chinese in the 21st century. If we cut funding for science and education, we should be doubling that funding.
So you think, but China's troubles, though, could make negotiations, could open a door for better negotiations between the U.S. and China?
I think that it depends on what negotiations we're talking about. If we're talking about Taiwan or military posture in the Indo-Pacific, that's going to be more about our alliances and our ability to supply Taiwan with the arms they need. And this summit this week with South Korea and Japan is critical on that front. If we're talking about economic negotiations for trade, for example, or mutual work on AI, as there's been some conversation about, yeah, potentially.
And climate?
Climate is the area where we have the biggest need for cooperation. They are a key to lowering our greenhouse gas emissions and hitting our Paris agreements. We really can't get there without China being on board, and we've got to be talking to them on climate.